For the crowned killers of Europe, torture, disemboweling, hanging, burning, strangling, poisoning, and killing in the most satanic manner is the order of the day. This is the modus operandi of royal families. For centuries, the royal elite have devised terrible punishments for anyone accused of treason. The monarchy reserved the most disgusting forms of torture and death for those who questioned the royal will. A so-called traitor would often have each arm and leg tied to 4 horses, which were whipped to gallop in opposite directions, thus ripping the victim into 4 parts, whilst still alive. Often, the royal elite would divide the victim's heart into sections and send these for public display to different parts of the country as a macabre warning. The British throne has been bathed in blood for centuries. At one time, Britain contained several small kingdoms. These small kingdoms, ruled over by an intermarried, self-elected elite, were gradually amalgamated into the single monarchy which rules over Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and secretly controls the United States of America. As each decade dawned, the most ruthless, cunning, and murderous monarchs assassinated the regional kings and seized their property. Over history, the most heartless, cruel, disgusting, dishonest, and psychopathic royal family would triumph, eventually establishing a global empire where ordinary people are crippled with taxes demanded by a monarchy living on the other side of the planet. The so-called British Empire, which at one time included Hong Kong and India, was created by blade and bullet. The so-called royal family which triumphed is basically German. They are seated on almost every throne in Europe. They are the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha-Battenberg bloodline, which often intermarries with the Hesse-Kassel German nobility and claim Jewish descent from the royal house of David in ancient Israel. They raise their children without love or compassion, breeding each successive generation to be at the head of a military establishment who keep an angered peace by use of fear, surveillance, and war. By the 1600s, the thrones of Europe were mostly occupied by Germans, which had super wealth, earning vast profits from peasant labor, outright slavery, and the international opium trade. This Germanic family, known as the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, the Schleswig-Holsteins, the Habsburgs, Romanovs, and House of Kassel-Hesse, shared the same tiny genetic bloodline. This can clearly be seen in a photograph of the British King George V standing beside Tsar Nicholas of Russia. Queen Victoria is considered the most British of all queens. Her husband was German, and she wrote letters of state in German. Contrary to what the royal spin doctors have written in the school history books, Queen Victoria was not popular. She was often hissed in public, and there were no less than 7 attempts to kill her. Keeping the populace ignorant, using adults and children alike as virtual slaves in workhouses, providing no adequate protection against hypothermia, working every man and woman to exhaustion, and imposing a crippling poll tax was the modus operandi of Queen Victoria and all her relatives sitting on the thrones across Europe. So-called Victorian values allowed children to be used as slave labor. Inhumane slums and widespread poverty was common across the whole of Europe right up until the 1970s. Even now, in the 21st century, large numbers of British people live in concrete boxes without adequate education, and therefore unable to find a profession to lift themselves out of poverty. There are as many homeless people in Europe today as there were 50 years ago.